on what you would do if you were Prime Minister, because you could do a lot.
Yeah, the first steps are a down payment. They're not all that we want to do, but until we get the waiting list down, frankly, we're going to struggle with the change that we need because we can't get our economy going. We need to stabilise our economy.
But you might not be as powerful as when you first get into office. That's kind of my point.
Keir Starmer has a lot of problems. Everything went wrong. The journalist destroyed him in an interview and accused him of stupidity. This interview was a spoiler for how the Labour Party will destroy our country. Starmer screwed up and was able to turn everyone against himself in record time. We start watching the first scene.
The first steps are going to be putting in place the plans for 40,000 extra appointments in the NHS to get the waiting list down each and every week. That's 2 million a year. Making sure that we start the recruitment of the teachers we need in our secondary schools, so all children have the opportunities that they need to go as far as their talents will take them, not be inhibited by the income or salary of their parents. Making sure that we're setting up Great British Energy so that we can deal with energy, renewables, and keep the energy costs down. Here in Stoke, the single thing every business has said to me is our energy bills are too high. These are some of the things that we can begin to do, the first steps, the down payment on the bigger change we need across the country.
The NHS needs massive reforms, without which it will cease to exist. Against the background of a shortage of specialists and the growing demand for medical services associated with aging and the general deterioration of British health, patients have to wait for several months, and sometimes even years, for necessary medical procedures, examinations and operations. According to estimates by the British Bureau of Budget Responsibility, without major changes, public health spending will grow by 3% per year and by 2070 will amount to 14.5% of the country's GDP, compared with the current 7.9%. The UK recently shut down its last coal-fired power plant. The predicted apocalyptic power outages did not occur, but neither did the reduction in electricity prices. Although coal is a relatively cheap source of energy, new and more environmentally friendly energy sources such as wind and solar are supposed to be even cheaper, right? In fact, there is a clear reason for this. And to be honest, the reason lies in the complete and absolute absurdity. The energy market lives by its own rules, ignoring competition and the source of energy production. In addition, the UK has an addiction that puts us in an unpleasant position. This dependence is natural gas. It would seem that the production of cheaper and cleaner energy should immediately lead to a reduction in our bills, but incredibly, this is not the main factor in setting prices. The final price paid to energy producers is actually set by the last unit of energy produced by the most expensive power plant currently operating. This was done in order to encourage manufacturers to generate electricity at the lowest cost in order to make the most profit. And since we are so dependent on gas and the prices for it are much higher than for everything else, this means that the real price is almost always set by the most expensive gas power plant in the country. Thus, even if some of the energy comes from solar plants and is very cheap, they will still be paid at the price as if it were the most expensive gas station, which completely negates the savings from using solar or wind energy.
I guess this is the point, because to take the NHS for an example, you say the NHS isn't on its knees but on its face, but what you're proposing is just a 1.1% increase in spending, and it's not just the NHS. Climate, for example, would be another example. You say you want a zero carbon electricity system by 2030, but you're now saying you're going to spend 6 times less than you did in 21 making that happen. It feels pretty timid, I've got to say.
Well, the first thing is that if you're on a waiting list and you need your hip replaced or your knee replaced or whatever it may be, saying you're going to get your operation isn't timid, it's vital.
I'm saying that 1.1% increase in spending is timid.
So this is change worth having. The bigger change for the NHS on AI, on tech, is really important part of the future of the NHS.
Starmer has reneged on his promise to allocate £140 billion to create a carbon-neutral electricity supply system by 2030. Initially, the Labour Party in 2021 promised to invest £28 billion a year until 2030 in green projects if it came to power a total of £140 billion. But Rachel Reeves said this figure would be a benchmark for work in the second half of the first Parliament's term. Starmer refused a repeated promise to allocate the amount that, according to Labour's initial estimates, was needed. I question whether Starmer can deliver on his promise by 2030 without spending £28 billion a year, as this figure is the result of Labour's own calculations.
You said you were going to.
This is a big moment for our country.
You said you were going to spend £28 billion on that, and now you've reduced it to £4.7 billion a year, 6 times less. It feels like you've started radical and you've become more and more timid.
No, the objective has always been clean power by 2030. And I've not moved that.
If you don't get it, will you have failed?
I have checked that every single thing we need to get to 2030 is in place, fully costed and fully funded. We do need investors to come up alongside us on this project. We've been talking to them now for the best part of 2 years about the conditions they need to come up and partner with us on this. And most of them say it's going to be difficult. But
Starmer hopes that voters will accept his argument about the need for higher taxes and limited increases in government spending. It's time to accept the harsh reality of fiscal policy, Starmer said, telling voters that politicians should stop insulting our intelligence with the trickery of easy answers. If the budget hole is real, but the Labour Party was dishonest during the election. The budget will necessarily include tax increases, although Labour has promised not to increase the tax burden on workers. Starmer said tax increases would prevent austerity and restore public services, while borrowing would contribute to long-term growth.
If I'm honest with you, I'm a bit confused by some of the arguments against this, right? Saying that private schools will close, for example, if it's introduced. Why wouldn't private schools just increase class sizes or cut staff and make, I guess, the kind of economic decisions that the state sector has to make all the time? Do you think that actually, private schools should have to make the kind of, cut their cloth in the same way that all the other schools do?
Yes, I think they will adapt, and they've had lots of increases in costs over the last 10, 14 years, and they've accommodated it, and there's no evidence to show that these schools will close. They don't have to pass the cost on to parents.
The Labour Party plans to introduce a 20% VAT on tuition fees in private schools. Most likely, most schools will shift the burden of increased costs to the parents of their students, which means that education fees will increase significantly, which has been quite a lot so far and ate up a significant part of the budget of those families in which children receive private education. The Labour Party believes that by imposing VAT on private schools, the government will be able to collect about £1.6 billion a year into the Treasury. This money can be used to create about 6,500 jobs for teachers in public schools. The Labour Party in its programme not only does not take into account the interests of private schools and parents of children, but also exaggerates their privilege. In addition, schools may have to reduce scholarships and discounts. This means that for many parents who will be deprived of school support, expenses will increase not by 20%, but much more.
It is about, as you rightly say, our policies, our ambition. It is also about who do you have in your mind's eye when you make your decisions. And I have in my mind's eye all the people that want to get on for themselves, their families, their communities, and ultimately their country, because I think that's the vast majority of people in this country who are reasonably minded, pretty tolerant, want to pull the country together and move it forward.
We are out of time, but just finally, what's more likely, you winning the election or England winning the Euros?
Well, I can't have both, I don't suppose.
No. Absolutely not.
The more important one is winning the election, but don't let that be any sort of reflection on. I say get behind the team when it comes to England.
Starmer promises change, but he doesn't think about people at all. In his victory speech, he talked about service workers, construction workers and nurses who feel insecure. Many people feel this insecurity every minute of every day. The cost of living is so high that it's a disaster. Starmer said on the steps of Downing Street that work on making changes would begin immediately, but this turned out to be untrue. From the elderly to the young, from representatives of heavy industry to small business owners, this administration seeks to light a fire in every corner of the UK, indiscriminately attacking anyone it sees fit to undermine even that little trust that has been slowly recovering from the chaos of the past 4 years. There is growing anxiety and confusion among the population caused by the incessant stream of nonsense. They constantly refer to the fact that the previous government left a huge financial hole, but this government was well aware of the financial problems the country was facing and could have won the country over to its side instead of joyfully fighting with its unsuspecting victims. This government sought to wage war on people who did not want to follow the socialist agenda from the very beginning of its tenure in power, demonstrating complete disregard for the real problems and frustrations of millions of people. Instead of listening to people and dispelling their fears, Starmer decided to use the police to track people down, encouraging others in their communities to inform on neighbours, friends and even relatives. While the prison system in the UK is already on the verge of collapse, additional prison places were found specifically for these people, and they were quickly tried in the courts and sentenced at lightning speed. People with no previous criminal records were paraded in the media as an intimidation tactic to stop any discussion on the issue. Having recovered from this political circus, the government is now targeting the elderly, pensioners, many of whom rely on additional financial assistance during the harsh winter months in the UK, are are threatened that this assistance will be cancelled so that the government can receive an additional £2 billion. These people have been contributing for decades, paying taxes to keep the country afloat. These people, as a rule, belong to a generation that does not like to be a burden, so if this money is taken away from them, many will face serious health risks. Meanwhile, Mr. Starmer promised to continue to allocate £3 billion a year to Ukraine to finance a war that does not and has never touched this country, in the most blatant way showing his true face. What do you think about this video? Share your thoughts. See you.